Hello, and welcome to another year in Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, Phil McKenzie.
Hello. Are we doing spooky voice? It's 2024, a year of extreme seriousness, because we're really starting off with a serious card.
Yeah. And also, your voice was incredibly robotic, as you said the first time.
Even better.
You were a sort of android anti-hero there for a moment.
It's clearly something to do with Audacity kicking in, which somehow...
It's not me.
Mutilates your internet connection for a short amount of time.
It's not me. It's you. You probably just started a video playing. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Uh-huh. Trying to blame Audacity.
The audacity of it.
The audacity of you, motherfucker. Anyway, what a fitting way to begin the year, our first card of 2024. Did I have to check the bottom right of my computer screen to make sure that's what year it was? I'll leave that up to you to decide. But the card is one that we were only too delighted to see coming around the bend right at the end of the recording session for the 2023 Handies. Because wouldn't you know it, they're doing Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker again. In fact, they're doing it as a main event, a 5-round, 25 minutes of opportunity for something to go terribly, poetically wrong, as it always seems to do for, somewhat both of these men, but really for Magomed Ankalaev. He really is just like a tragic comic hero of his own story.
Yep.
And it's a pretty decent card, as a year opening fight night. It's got some other stuff on it. I believe, as you pointed out 2 weeks ago when we last recorded, Phil, Nicolau Kopp 2, another rematch, an interesting matchup. We like both the fighters, but perhaps not destined to be a great fight. Still, I'm always happy to see a likely boring fight between two interesting contenders, so I will count that as a strength for the card. We've also got Jim Miller versus Gabriel Benitez asking the question, is it possible for a younger man to catch up to a crusty old dog in terms of shotness? And then bantamweights Ricky Simone, Mario Bautista, I think, is poised to be a surprisingly competitive and almost certainly very entertaining fight. And that's not all. There's other good stuff on here too, but that is what we are going to shoot to cover on the first real episode of 2024.
It's a good one.
Yeah. We should start with the main event, Phil.
Yeah.
Magomed.
I mainly find myself thinking, like, what's the funniest way this one could go down? Obviously, like, because in most ways it could. Like, I still feel like it's pretty guaranteed to be amusing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because on the one hand, Ankalaev could just absolutely crush him, much like he did in his much-delayed rematch with Ion Cutelaba. And this is funny, because you're just like, this whole thing was a complete waste of time.
Yeah, you actually didn't have to do that.
The first fight was silly. Everyone knew you were a much better fighter the whole time. This has been a complete waste of everyone's time. And that would be funny. On the other hand, any kind of competitive pushback from Johnny Walker should also be considered like an embarrassment.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing with these guys last time, is that Ankalaev, as we kind of said he might, did not do the best job of making this look like the utter blowout that it really should be. Yeah,
I mean, that's just kind of who he is. That's why we love him.
Yep.
And this one, really more than any other fight, was him getting in his own way. We'll just, I suppose, recap what happened for those pitiable few who are not familiar. Ankalaev and Walker fought for maybe 3 minutes, 3.5 or something like that. It was mostly Ankalaev pressuring, because that's what happens in modern Johnny Walker fights. He dances around. He did, to his credit, Johnny, start kicking the shit out of Ankalaev's legs, taking a cue from Ankalaev's horrible strategic mishap against Jan Blachowicz. Ankalaev dealt with that a little better. There's not as much nuance to Johnny Walker's kicking game, to be fair. He started checking them. Unlike Jan Blachowicz, Johnny Walker did not want to have his kicks checked. Yeah, that was part of the trouble, I suppose. Jan didn't care. He's like, shin to shin? Great. My shins are made of Polish steel. But Ankalaev also started countering Walker with really nasty leg kicks of his own. He landed one decent counter right hook off a missed Walker kick, and then one really nice straight left to the body, which was the strike which prompted Johnny Walker to pretend to be hurt in order to bait the famously passionate Magomed Ankalaev into an error. He pretended to be hurt, went with a shockingly quick flying knee for a man who's 6'8" and probably walks around at 324 pounds. But this resulted in Ankalaev being tricked into out-grappling him. Rear waist cinch, Johnny Walker goes down. Ankalaev realizes he's perilously close to winning the fight easily and knees Johnny Walker in the face while he's on the floor. And that's the end of the fight.
Well, and then we get the incredibly weird stoppage where Johnny Walker is fine, and they ask him where he is, and he's like, the desert. And they're like, that's not good enough, Johnny Walker. The fight is over.
Yeah. Where he seemed to just sort of be dismissing the doctor, like, get away from me. You're short. Get away from me, little man. So that's what happened. Yeah. I mean, it did ultimately still look like a fight, as did Ankalaev Kudalaba won. To your comparison, where Ankalaev was the better fighter. We knew he is. He should be. So what room is there for things to go wrong in a way that we could actually possibly predict? Because we couldn't have called that.
No.
Yeah, I mean, do you expect anything different from Ankalaev this time around?
No, not really. I mean, I think the main thing is that, as you said, like, Walker isn't a particularly nuanced kicker, and Ankalaev is, like, as we've said many times, a genuinely good counterpuncher.
Yeah.
He was starting to dial in into Walker's how to counterpunch Walker's hands.
Yep.
And, Johnny Walker being Johnny Walker meant that on the occasion that he was committing to punches was meaning that he was like getting countered like very far out of position.
Yeah.
And it is one of those ones like the Kutalaba fight. The first one with against Ankalaev was a fight that Kutalaba was sort of fairly soundly losing, and the second fight was just an utter slaughter.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you just got to balance this against the fact that, like, Ankalaev does not want to lead.
Yeah.
And Walker does many weird things. Which means that, like, do I expect Ankalaev to just, like, push him back into the fence and just counterpunch him to death? Like some kind of the ideal for what he should be doing would be like Dave Branch, Thiago Santos.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just like push him into the fence and just obliterate him, and take the takedown if it's there. I'm sure he could do that. I just don't trust him to.
Yeah.
But yeah, mostly if he has like an empty range game with Johnny Walker as is his wont. I think we've seen that he probably wins that anyway.
He should. He really should. I mean, he should have won. I mean, the thing is like Ankalaev has really won almost every single UFC fight he's had. He had one freak loss, which appeared to persuade him to stop grappling willingly with everybody in his debut. And then he had a draw and a no contest in his last two. Otherwise, it's all wins.
Which is also an amazing thing to take away, considering that he's at light heavyweight. It's like, I better not take people down because of their dangerous guards.
Well, to be fair, I mean, the guy who submitted him, Paul Craig, is a representative of a particularly durable light heavyweight archetype, which is the guy who only guard grapples. For whatever reason, light heavyweight just always has one of these dudes who just has terrible wrestling.
It's because there's no one else who does it.
It's true, because no one else can grapple good, and that should be all the more reason for
everyone is suddenly shocked at the idea that someone can attack from their back.
Yeah, and clearly,
this happened. This was notably something which existed at heavyweight before. Before the general size of a heavyweight moved away from being the size of light heavyweight.
That's true. You had Nog, you had Frank Mir.
And Fabricio Verdun before he realized that this was stupid.
Yes. The thing is, I mean, this is one of the most maddening things about Ankalaev. He really does have to be either tricked or coerced into using his wrestling and grappling. Even though, from everything I've seen, it just seems like probably the most straightforward way to beat all of these guys for him. And in the brief, what was it? It was 3 minutes and 13 seconds against Johnny Walker, despite the fact that he was getting the better of Johnny on the feet, narrowly, as he does. Clearly his best success of the fight, up until the illegal knee, was when they got to the ground.
Yep.
I mean, Johnny Walker is somebody who gets away with people trying to grapple him because he's so huge, but there are limits to sheer physicality and size when stacked up against like a genuinely good mat wrestler, which Ankalaev is. And Ankalaev got him down with a rear waist cinch, immediately controlled his wrist, like gift wrapped his wrist around his torso, and just got like 13 free shots off with his left hand while Walker was struggling back to his feet. Like, clearly that is a pretty efficient way of just banking clear rounds on Johnny Walker, but he had to be tricked into doing it. He didn't want to win that easily. And when he realized it was happening, he threw it away almost deliberately, like, no, this isn't supposed to happen.
It needs to be harder than this. We'll not take a win like this.
Yeah. Clearly we have to pick Ankalaev, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, there's no reason to expect that Johnny Walker's training at SBG Island has made him any better at anything apart from not killing himself.
Yeah. He's learned to preserve himself a bit more. Or to extend himself, at least.
Yeah. But at the cost of just being a dreadfully inert range striker, so that, against anyone who isn't within a certain spitting distance of his athleticism, he can just wipe them out. He can just hang around until something Johnny Walker-esque will happen and they die.
Yeah.
But, there's still just loads of people that aren't as athletic as him, but are close enough and have well-defined games that I would still expect to thrash him. Like, he would still lose very badly to Nikita Krylov again for exactly the same reasons, which is that Nikita Krylov is incredibly durable and aggressive.
Yes. And Nikita
And
Krylov,
that's it.
a lesson from Magomed Ankalaev, will insist on wrestling absolutely everyone.
Mm-hmm.
He will play his whole game against everybody he faces. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think the Blachowicz to Walker comparison is instructive here because, I mean, obviously, ultimately, Ankalaev managed to pull out a draw in that fight, which is still an accomplishment of some sort because it started so horribly. But so much of his struggles with Blachowicz was not merely the low kicks. There were a multitude of factors. As I said, the fact that Blachowicz just is one of these kickers who just didn't care that his kicks were being checked. He was happy to just basically go durability against durability, shin to shin. So that kind of was like a game-breaking ability of his that Walker already demonstrated he doesn't really have. But there's also just he's not as subtle with his setups as you said earlier. He's also just, his footwork isn't as good. Like, Ankalaev managed to look by the, last minute of the half round they shared like a pretty solid pressure fighter. He was cutting Walker off quite easily. Every time Walker tries to change angles, unlike Jan Blachowicz, who does an excellent job of keeping his jab lined up as he moves side to side, Ankalaev was able to sort of corral Johnny Walker and cut him off as he was trying to change angles and land shots like on the reset, so to speak. I just think he's just a far more sophisticated kickboxer than Johnny Walker, down to the fundamental level.
Mm-hmm.
And he will find his counters probably by the end of the first round. Johnny Walker's punches will all be missing or will be being punished. He just should go out there and just body lock him and push him into the cage immediately. I know Johnny Walker's big and everything, but Ankalaev's never had an issue with cardio. Not really.
Yep. Yeah, as you said, the Jan Blachowicz fight, even without any legs, he was able to win rounds 4 and 5 very dominantly.
Yeah, and it helps that Jan Blachowicz is known for gassing, but Johnny Walker, I suspect, is still capable of gassing as he used to. It's just that you have to make him work.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, like a lot of this, his only real developments at SPG Island are in preservation by not doing much.
Yeah, so the sort of the staid, low output boxing approach, it just isn't going to reveal that weakness that Johnny Walker almost certainly still has.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Ankalaev he really should finish him. This is the main thing, is that of all his many, many physical gifts, of which he has a lot, Johnny Walker probably doesn't have the single most important one for MMA, which is just raw durability. He's been knocked out by a couple times, and not necessarily by the biggest punches. Well, Mulhill, yes. Corey Anderson, no.
Yeah.
And as we've seen, like, when he gets hit, it's often in extremely compromising situations.
Yes.
The Krylov kept him down for just entire rounds. Ankalaev should be able to just beat him up if he does that from there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things. Like, Ankalaev just really should finish him. There is a small risk of him getting meme KO'd, but this risk is present for everyone who will fight Johnny Walker ever.
Yeah, and it is, Ankalaev's reasonably durable, and it is also a benefit of his often infuriating poise and caution that he's been buzzed in plenty of fights. He got buzzed by Jan Blachowicz as well as having his legs torn apart. He got buzzed by, who was it? Did he fight Thiago Santos? I think that was one. Yeah.
Did he?
And I think he even got buzzed, I think, by Özdemir. Just like caught him with one good shot and had him a little unsteady. And he always recovers. He stays calm because that's all he does is stay calm. So I would say the chances of a meme KO are, I mean, who knows? If that flying knee Johnny Walker tried to bait him into had landed, that probably would have knocked him out. But they're lower than they are for many fighters against Johnny Walker because he knows how to recover and stay within himself, often to his detriment. But yeah, he really should just...
Yes, he is definitely a fighter who could do with getting out of himself a bit more.
Absolutely. But he stays rock solid when he's in trouble, and it actually does help him there.
Yeah, and also, like, he sometimes gets inspired to do things that he's good at when he's in trouble, like wrestling.
That too. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the closer Johnny Walker comes to a meme KO without actually delivering it, it could be could very well be his undoing, as it already sort of was. So yeah, I mean, you have to pick Ankalaev.
Yeah,
and
I mean, the most everyone ever manages to do is, both Krylov and Blachowicz basically managed to scare Ankalaev into offensively wrestling.
Yeah. And I'm going to think I'm going to say that happens. Ankalaev will pressure Johnny Walker pretty well, even if he's not throwing a lot. His footwork is good enough that Walker's going to start doing stupid shit, as he already has. I'm going to, as a vote of confidence for the beleaguered Magomed Ankalaev, I'm going to say I think he finishes Johnny Walker.
Yeah,
I think he does it.
Yep. I think he does it. Honestly, I would like to see him do it. It's basically my, probably like round 2 or 3. I don't think it's going to last that long. I think you could see him dialing into Walker's punches, and once that's gone, what else is there?
Yeah, didn't take him that long before it seemed like he had his number on the feet even.
Yep.
Ankalaev is like light heavyweights Leon Edwards. Like I would like to see him. I would like to see him break through because when he first debuted, we were like, this is like a serious prospect. This guy is like possible championship material. He's that good. Or he has at least the potential to be that good. So you can do it, Magomed. I believe in you. I don't believe in you, but I'm let this inspire you to go out there and finish Johnny Walker.
Something we do not believe in and that we have never believed in is Johnny Walker.
that is absolutely true.
Throughout all of his wins, throughout all of his losses, we have never for a minute believed in Johnny Walker. We've never believed that he was on his way up or that he has made a comeback.
Yep. Let it never be said.
He's just athletic.
Let it never be said that we have an ounce of faith in Johnny Walker beyond his physical gifts. All right. Let's call it there then and take a break. When we come back, the co-main event, a flyweight fight, a rematch, another one, between Matthews Nicolau and Manel Kape. As said before, after that, we are going to get into a lightweight fight between Jim Miller and Gabriel Benitez, and then the bantamweight battle featuring Ricky Simone and Mario Batista. All of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the co-main event of this upcoming Fight Night card, which is, it is at the Apex. Matthews Nicolau.
It doesn't, to the best thing you can say about it is that it doesn't look like an Apex card.
No, it doesn't necessarily look like a I don't know if it necessarily has the pull of what a travel Fight Night card often is now, because those are sort of like minor pay-per-views at this point. Mm-hmm. Or maybe that's just the contrast. This feels like what a Fight Night used to be, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels like a Fight Night.
Yeah. Just a pretty solid
some
card.
Offshoot of Dana White's Contender Series with a main event with people that you recognize on it.
Yeah. I mean, fuck, at this point, they should just have the Apex cards. Dana should still be sitting at his little, like, Caesar's table doing thumbs up and thumbs downs. Shit, he had to be called into the cage at the conclusion of Ankalaev Walker 1. Do you remember that?
No.
Because after the doctor stopped it and Johnny Walker didn't even realize what had happened, the referee waved it off, and Walker thought he was just resuming the fight.
Oh, yeah, and he starts, like, running around the
referee. He shoved the referee, and then Ankalaev and Walker just continued trying to fight each other for, like, 3 minutes. The cage is completely swarming with security, but they keep, like, having to be held back as they try to get at each other. And Dana White had to make a red-faced appearance in the cage, laying down the law. I guess that's one useful thing about
authority.
Yeah, it's one useful thing about having like an absolute autocrat in charge of the organization, that like the fighters did do what he said.
Yep.
So it prevented a mishap. Anyway, Matthews Nicolau, Manel Kape 2, the second rematch of the card. And you already rained on my parade, Phil. I brought this up a couple weeks ago. I was like, oh, that's a good one. And you were like, well, it's not good. And to your point, I didn't even realize at the time that it was a rematch. I had sort of forgotten the first fight. So,
why?
You
know what? I think we both moved somewhat in the other person's position on this one, because having rewatched their first fight,
I feel that way too. And I'm still of the position that it's a fight between two interesting contenders. I like both these fighters. It has more leeway than a typical Apex kind of fight, shall we say, to suck. Because I'll watch something that sucks that at least has stakes over something that sucks that I would never ever care about.
Yeah. And I think, I've probably overestimated how little I've over-egged how little Kape throws, because I think I was burned a little by one of his earlier fights. Which one was it? Was it against?
That was probably the fight with Ode Osborne. Maybe no, that was a quick KO.
Yeah,
it probably was just you remembering the Nicolau fight.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen a fight with him where I was just like, this is a stinker.
The one with Pantoja, maybe? He ate a bunch of body kicks and didn't do much?
Yeah, mostly it was just him backpedaling and refusing to do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of their previous fight was him at least positionally being quite aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicolau kind of fighting off the back foot, fighting off the cage, and trying to counterpunch and hit takedowns.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those fights where I found myself thinking afterwards, and again, like with misconceptions around this one, I also remember it as being like a cleaner win for Nicolau than it actually was.
Yeah,
it was quite close. And, only really comes down to like a single key takedown that Nicolau gets.
Pretty much. And it's one of those fights, too, where if you watch the last 20 seconds with the misapprehension that there's another round coming, you'd probably be persuaded that Manel Kape is about to start hurting Nicolau and possibly finishing him.
Yeah. And the other thing I just thought, like, watching it, is that this does not seem sustainable for Mateus Nicolau.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not just in terms of the direction that the fight was going, but also just like this isn't going to work for long.
Yeah,
like this approach is not optimal. because he's essentially giving up all of his space in the cage and attempting to counterpunch against someone who is a more durable, harder hitting puncher, and not one who's like notably monotone. Like Carp is quite good at feinting. He's quite good at selecting targets when he is throwing. And yeah, I just found myself thinking like, you were riding the absolute razor's edge for this one, Ankalaev.
I mean, to the opposite of that last point, I've often gotten the impression in Kopp's more frustrating performances that part of it is that he has too much to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really good athlete and such a flexible technician that I think he sort of can get some sort of analysis paralysis when he's just trying to select what insane combination to put together. He's a very diverse striker.
Yeah. So, and that kind of left me thinking, and Nikolaev's obviously got knocked out recently, but that is also just something that happens to him.
Yep. Three times.
Yep. But it's also just one that, it's just something, and I thought Kopp's most recent performances have been good. I think in terms of him just throwing more, and trying to control the fight more. I think you said this before we started recording, but like before he got to the UFC, and I think possibly in his early UFC fights, he's a dreadful round winner.
Yes,
because you get the impression that he's one of those incredible athletes who simply expects that at some point he will win the fight.
Yeah, and I don't even, it's not just athleticism. It is a mindset thing too. Like whether he's got too many options to consider, or he's just one of these guys who loves doing cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing with Kopp is a lot of his most frustrating fights. Yeah, maybe it's not him having too much to choose from. Maybe it's him being too picky and wanting the perfect shot, particularly in his last fight against, granted, a less impressive opponent in Felipe dos Santos. But just in terms of output, the number of jabs, simple, basic, clean shots that Kopp put on Dos Santos, far and away his highest output performance to date. It seemed like he wanted to make a statement, like, I can go out there and crush people, which I believe he can against most of this division. He's very talented and skilled.
Yeah, and that was a pleasing change of form from like the Pantoja fight, which was because you could argue that like Dos Santos is someone who pretty much just invites lots of volume and successful counterpunching and all this other kind of stuff simply by being a bolt upright, incredibly aggressive banger who's just going to soak up damage. But on the other hand, like when Pantoja put admittedly, more variegated and skillful pressure on Kopp, he did not respond by upping his volume in turn. He is not necessarily one of these guys who, takes what you give him and modulates his volume with what is coming with what the opponent is throwing at him. So yeah, I think the Felipe dos Santos fight is actually a genuinely encouraging sign because it showed that he is capable of increasing his pace.
Yeah, and indeed, it's mostly Kopp pressuring Dos Santos. Like, yeah. Now the one thing as we know from their first fight, which I think you're right, is not really a bad fight. It's just not particularly memorable. Is that Nicolau, if Kopp's performance against Dos Santos was in some way a response to Dos Santos' game, which seems likely, Nicolau is not going to create that kind of trigger. Nicolau is, and I think this is sort of what you were alluding to before, he is very much a counterpuncher. Either wants you to throw or wants you to chase him so much that he can run you into something. And also, this is how his wrestling works. He is a counter takedown artist as well, something he probably could have afforded to lean on a bit more against Brandon Royval, which was his last knockout loss. Although, to be fair, It happened very quickly. So this is a real opportunity for Kopp to... I mean, if I made this comparison already with Ankalaev, Kopp is the second Leon Edwards on this card. This is a real opportunity to be given a relatively blank canvas, a lot of initiative, and to do something with that other than just have a sort of tit-for-tat fight where he very slowly builds up and maybe is left wishing he had just 3 more minutes to put a stamp on it. Because I think if there's one lesson he should take away from both their first fight, his last fight, and Nikolau's entire career, it should be that he is more durable than Matthews Nicolau. And he can go in there into dangerous waters and, if need be, exchange punches with him and come out on top. Because Kopp is super hard to hurt. I mean, that's just true. And Nicolau is very much not the case.
Yeah, a lot of that Pantoja, when that Pantoja fight had the classic durability athlete cheat thing going on for Kopp, where he would get hit by huge shots and would look annoyed and discomforted.
Yeah.
Like this is not enjoyable.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy getting hit by this guy. Just like, that's not how people normally react.
Yeah, his legs weren't going. He wasn't shaken up. He was just like, I didn't like that.
Yeah. When that's not how people react when they're typically hit by Pantoja.
Right.
Yeah. So, basically, all things being said, this is definitely one of those ones where I feel like I've seen enough improvement from Kopp to think that he can win this, unless Nicolau can come in with a very different game plan. I think I've seen enough from Nicolau over his career that I don't expect him to do that.
Yeah.
And the fight was so close, and one which I expect to turn against Nicolau eventually, even without any improvements from Kopp. But yeah, I sort of have to pick Kopp in the rematch.
Yeah. I'm kind of leaning the same way. And I just hope that he's, not risk averse. I don't think is really the way to play against Nicolau. This is something we've talked about many times before, but it is just fundamentally difficult to play the part of the counterpuncher in this sport.
Yep.
And it should be particularly difficult against a guy like Kopp, who has so many ways of using an initiative to trick his opponents, and has the speed and the power to make those tricks really impactful. And the thing with Nicolau, I really like Nicolau. I enjoy watching him fight when he lands such beautifully clean counter shots and everything. But he really is he can be really frustrating to fight, but yet he gives a massive opportunity, and that he is super, super willing to concede ground.
Yeah, this is that first fight is, that's American top team level cagecraft.
Yes. Yeah.
This is Jorge Masvidal type. Just Tyron Woodley
loping
back to the cage. No one has ever told you not to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, loping side to side, really, really relying on the little direction change fakes to get out of trouble. Does not necessarily have the, as I talked about Jan Blachowicz having before, or what I've praised Sean O'Malley for in the past. Does not really have the threatening positional approach to evasive footwork. He will put himself out of position if you push him hard enough, because he does not want you to be close unless it's for the one shot he's trying to land. So yeah, I think Kopp could pressure him really hard. He's capable of doing that. And I think, again, he could just invite trades, and it would probably just work out for him.
Yeah. I just kind of got to pick him. I didn't expect to going in, I don't think. But yeah, I just didn't feel that like it looked like a replicable performance for Nicolau.
Yeah.
Especially not if there's any kind of improvement from Cup.
Yeah. But obviously, if there isn't, or if he goes back to his old ways, if Nicolau's game just brings out the worst side of him, he could very easily lose the exact same split decision. Because, again, like I said, as inherent as the problems are. I forgot. I just watched the end of Cop Dos Santos. I forgot that Cop was like trying to hug Dos Santos, and Dos Santos didn't understand and shoved him. And and then Cop very coolly just gave him a pat on the butt, like, all right, misunderstanding. Yeah, the thing is as inherent as the problems are, or as big as the inherent problems are in Nicolau's game, it is frustrating to deal with if you just want the guy to give you something to respond to. So the door to me is wide open for Cop to just have the exact same tit for tat. Nobody really has any idea who's picking up these rounds, and maybe Nicolau gets it because he's the guy who will go for a takedown now and then. And Cop basically never does. But Cop should get it, and he should get it impressively. And if he does, he's probably lining himself up for a title shot. So I think it's now or never for this guy. How old is Manel Cop? He was born in 93. So that makes him
31.
31. Yeah, November of 93. So that makes him 30.
Yeah, not super young, but especially for a flyweight. But I think he is looking like he is in or approaching his prime at the moment.
Yeah, 30 years old. I mean, it would be very reasonable for him to be peaking right now, and he certainly looked like in rare form in his last fight. So, I don't know. I'm retaining some excitement for this one. Like I said, it can suck, and it still has enough stakes that I'm curious. I will watch it and care, but it has real potential for Cop to prove that he is like ready to contend. And I think he's always had the capability to do that. So I would love to see it.
Yeah, I like that. I think I've come around on this one a little bit.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad to have set you up for disappointment.
Hooray.
All right, let's take one more break then. When we come back, Jim Miller, Gabriel Mowgli Benitez, and Ricky Simone Mario Bautista after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back. We are finishing up this pretty solid-looking Fight Night card with, first of all, this isn't, this could be, Phil, a Glue Factory fight. But honestly, it is unclear to me which of these men is destined to be turned into adhesive.
Yep.
Jim Miller, 40 years old. I think this will be his 54th professional fight, some 40-odd of which have all been under the UFC banner. I believe you looked it up before. He has both the most wins and the most fights of any UFC fighter ever. And then Gabriel Benitez, only 35, only 33 fights on his record, 5 years younger, 20 fewer miles on the tread, but he has been struggling. And Jim Miller, not winning them all, but still winning a great many of his recent matchups. Often very impressively, often by quick finish, which tends to be one of the ways that Mowgli Benitez has always lost. So it's sort of an OSP Shogun 2 kind of how much can you catch up to the guy who is already way older than you?
Yep. It's interesting. In fact, when was the last time Jim Miller won a decision? Guess, without looking at his Fight Finder.
I'm gonna say, this is just a guess, that it was his fight with Joe Lozon, which was in...
Very close. It was the fight after that. It was Thiago Alves in 2016.
I was gonna say 2015 was gonna be my guess for the year, so I was pretty close.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's kill or be killed, which indeed has been the story of most of Jim Miller's entire career.
I mean, he's lost a bunch of decisions, but he hasn't won any since that Thiago Alves fight, which was a very impressive performance from him.
That's true, actually. He's not
an incredibly silly idea from Thiago.
Yeah,
it was like, I'm short, I should be a lightweight.
He's not kill or be killed, is he, Jim Miller? He's actually kill or sort of just lose.
Slowly lose.
Yeah. Most of his losses are decisions.
Yep.
By a pretty wide margin.
Yeah, still a tough dude.
Still a very tough dude. So yeah, what do you make of Jim Miller's recent run? Does he look different to you? How is age affecting him?
I don't think he actually does look that different, to be honest. Mostly looks like Jim Miller, and in that way, like because we've seen so much of him, there tends to be like a commonality with Jim Miller, is that he tends to, and we've said this a few times, he sort of tends to lose to people who are at a certain point on the size curve.
Yeah.
Like, not necessarily like he loses to big guys because he's, he was basically someone who was lightweight sized back when, back in 2008.
Yeah.
Which means that he's now like the size of a modern, like a medium-sized modern featherweight.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily that he always loses to like big people who just outsize him, because he actually does tend to like thump up on giant gangly dudes.
Yes.
Who are uncoordinated, and then he'll just punch them in the face and tap them out. But people who can strand him at mid-range, kick him up, get him sort of lure him into just like a long-range tit-for-tat kickboxing match, have always been pretty tough for him.
Yeah.
Whether that's, Scott Holtzman in more recent years, or, his fight with Donald Cerrone was when Donald Cerrone wasn't completely shot.
Yeah, that was the last one. Recall that he actually got that one back. Donald Cerrone did catch up to him in age.
Yes, that is. Yes, that is one of the classic examples of the younger man becoming more shot than the guy that he's already beat. Yeah,
it tends to be like not even huge guys, but just thicker guys. Because Jim Miller is, you can say his height, he does feel like a featherweight, but he's a pretty stocky fighter. Like I doubt he, even when he was younger, would have comfortably made featherweight. He's pretty heavily built. It's guys who are even more heavily built who routinely beat him. Alexander Hernandez, Joe Selecki, even Vince Pichel, Francisco Trinaldo. These are all beefcakes. These guys always pick up a decision against Jim Miller. Gabriel Benitez is not that.
The interesting thing is, I think of Benitez as like quite a tall fighter.
According to Tapology, their dimensions are identical.
Yeah, that's the thing. He is exactly the same size as Jim Miller. And so, I guess the main thing is, I don't think Gabriel Benitez is skillful enough and sort of well-schooled enough that I do not think that he's one of these guys where it's just that Jim Miller is going to be able to instantly tap him.
Yeah. Benitez, not exactly... he's not really prone to submission losses of any kind, is he?
I mean, admittedly, he has mostly been put into fights very deliberately as a stand-up action fighter.
Yeah.
So it can be hard to... It might be tricky to say.
The thing is what has usually been Benitez's undoing, and this is, I think, a good sign for him here, knowing what we do about Jim Miller, is relentless pressure.
Yeah.
Because Benitez, is he also, tell me he's not an American top team fighter, is he? No, American, AKA. He's AKA.
Okay.
At least he was whenever this Tapology profile was written. Benitez is another fighter who will tend to put his back against the fence and stay there.
Yeah.
And he can fight off it pretty well. I mean, Benitez has really fast hands. He's a powerful striker. Obviously, he's well known for the power of his kicks, but he's really sharp with his hands as well. He's super fast and dynamic, and a good counterpuncher, technically speaking. But he's not the most durable guy in the world, and positionally, he will kind of screw himself by just engaging in a fight where his standing is just worse than the guy who has all this space at his back to work with. Jim Miller, as we now well know, has lost fights, in my mind, precisely because he is incapable of insisting on pressure.
Yes, he is positionally aimless.
Now, if Benitez willingly goes back to the fence, it's not like Jim Miller is so averse to pressure that he won't do it, given the opportunity. He's just sort of, he's got like that Anthony Pettis kind of approach to ring generalship. Like, the opponent just kind of gets to dictate which direction they're going. Has Benitez ever been in a front foot fight? Like against somebody who was not themselves a noted pressure fighter? Because if the other guy's a pressure fighter, Benitez is backing up. We know that.
Yep.
Right?
No. I mean, I think both of these guys just go in there and they're just like, it's just going to be a fight. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Move forward, move backwards. But yeah, Benitez will give range all the time. Whereas
Yeah.
Jim Miller will tend to accept it, simply accept the kind of distance that his opponent wants to fight at.
Yeah, Benitez just doesn't really like leading with anything that isn't a kick. So
yeah. But then again, Jim Miller doesn't like closing distance.
Yeah. He can. I mean, it's any resistance changes his mind. Like, recall his fight with Alexander Hernandez. He came into that and it was pretty clear, like, he knew how to beat Hernandez. He had done some homework. But, Hernandez is a tough guy, and he started fighting back, and Jim Miller just got pushed out of the winning game plan.
Yeah.
Or rather, he sort of fell into a more reckless, desperate version of it, where instead of, like, using his counters to leverage into these moments of pressure, he just started, like, running after Hernandez, and that's not the way to beat Hernandez. You want to run after him, you gotta, like, nail him with something hard first and get him panicking. Yeah. Am I about to pick Jim Miller? It doesn't seem right.
You know what? I think we've been agreeing too much recently. You pick Jim Miller. I think I'm going to pick Benitez.
Yeah. Okay. I'm happy to be
Because-
wrong here, and I'd be more happy to be right. But yeah, go on.
I mean, my main thing is I'm just going to pick Benitez to be more durable at lightweight because he's been struggling to make featherweight these last few times. It is leading to him getting, I think, knocked out more.
Oh, this is at lightweight. I didn't even
And-
put that together.
Yeah. I mean, God, I would, as much as I was talking about like Jim Miller being an undersized modern lightweight, I would not want to see him cutting to featherweight at this point in his career.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he's going to be more durable. I just don't trust Jim Miller to win any kind of decision because he can't do that. I mean, and I think his chances of knocking Benitez out are just lowered enough by Benitez not dehydrating himself. That's going to be my pick.
Yeah.
A very reasoned one.
Yeah. And that makes a sort of sense to me. There's always a gamble with a guy just discovering newfound durability. I'm going to go ahead and double down on the idea that nobody has a great performance in their first fight in a new division. To me, it seems
Benitez was a lightweight for the Ontiveros fight.
Oh, he was. Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Also not a great performance per se, but hey.
Yes.
He did get the win over a noted glass cannon in Charlie Ontiveros. And quite a big one, to his credit. I'm going to go ahead and say, though, that there is a distinct possibility that Benitez does not enjoy the feeling of being wrestled by somebody who is used to grappling with bigger men. Jim Miller, I think, being an old man, still has his strength, clearly still has his power, and I just think Benitez is too... If he were any less positionally like sacrificial, I think I would like his chances here better, because we know that Jim Miller will concede the other person's fight, but I think in this case, the other person's fight looks too much like the one Jim Miller would like to be having. But yeah, who knows? Maybe he just kicks the shit out of Jim Miller from range and Jim can't keep the pressure up.
Yeah, that's just my main thing. I just don't trust Jim to win decisions anymore.
Yeah. One thing I will say...
if he doesn't dust him instantly, I just don't know how he wins it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. He basically only wins by quick finish. Not basically. He literally only wins by quick finish. One thing I will say, which maybe colors our picks here, and which I really meant to bring up in our last fight as a good thing for Cop, is that this is the Apex cage. Meaning there is less room to run around in. That could be bad for Benitez.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will certainly be bad for Matthews Nicolau in the previous fight. Probably also bad for Johnny Walker. It's basically bad if you're the guy who concedes ground, to have just less room and more corners to run into. All right.
That's a very good point.
Final fight on the card then. Let's see if we can split picks again. I don't know that we're going to.
We're not going to.
Ricky Simone, Mario Bautista is the final fight we'll be talking about. Second from the bottom of the main card, and I think a very good matchup. I mean, obviously this is a sort of a bounce back for Ricky Simone after that loss to Song Yadong. But I think it is also a pretty realistic opportunity for Mario Bautista to break through and make himself a contender. I think he's really has become a very solid fighter. Longtime listeners of the show will know that I sort of have a thing for MMA lab fighters. John Crouch, I think, is one of the best, most sort of unheralded coaches in MMA. He has just been turning out really solid athletes for decades now, going all the way back to Benson Henderson as his first big star. And Mario Bautista is an MMA lab fighter. So is, by the way, Marcus McGee, who's also fighting on this card. That's a guy that you should watch if you're not already familiar. And there's a sort of a type There's variations, but there's a type of fighter that the MMA lab produces. They are good athletes, generally just like, I don't know if John.
I think well conditioned is probably the better way of putting it.
Yeah. They are fighters who are down to have a really hard fight, and if the opponent has any gaps in their stamina, the MMA lab fighter almost always wins. They are all good defensive wrestlers and excellent scramblers. That is like a hallmark of that gym. And they also tend to, I think John Crouch lets his fighters, particularly the really athletic ones, be kind of crazy when they start. I don't think he's a Henry Hooft who, tears down all the bad habits immediately. But there is definitely an arc to pretty much every MMA lab fighter I've ever watched, where by the midpoint, certainly by the end of their careers, they turn out to be pretty principled, solid, workmanlike strikers. And I mean workmanlike in a good way. I'm talking professional. And Mario Batista has reached that point, I think. When he got to the UFC, he was in full wild man mode. He really had no regulators whatsoever on his output, no caution about what kind of exchanges he would allow himself to get into. He paid for that against Corey Sandhagen, and then much more embarrassingly against Trevin Jones, almost winner of the best bad fight of 2023. Where he was just so crazy aggressive against somebody who was even more of a pure counterpuncher than Matthews Nicolau that he forced Trevin Jones to KO him. But since then, Batista has remained a very dangerous fighter, still obviously capable of putting people away in the first round, but he has become just much more poised on the feet. I think his understanding of how to use his footwork has improved. His understanding of how to work with distance has improved, which helps because he's a pretty rangy fighter for this division. He's taller than Gabriel Benitez, who just moved up from featherweight. He's 5'9". And I think that will make him notably taller than Ricky Simone, who's 5'6". And he's just gotten a lot better at using that range, at keeping people on the end of his punches and working his way into exchange distance behind feints and jabs and not hanging out there quite so long, not being so bound and determined to answer every single shot thrown at him with 3 more, which got him in trouble in the past. And on top of that, of course, solid defensive wrestler and really, really great scrambler. So
he's a sensationally good scrambler.
Yeah, as you said earlier, a great interstitial fighter, really dangerous in the transitions. He just has a feel for how to sneak into a dominant position in what otherwise looks like a pretty neutral scramble. So I think with all those qualities, it's not actually impossible for me to see him beating Ricky Simone. I mean, he's certainly got a lot of the answers to the problems that Ricky Simone poses and an obvious advantage from the outset of just being significantly taller. So why are we picking Ricky Simone?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Because he can at least dictate the opening of the wrestling exchanges.
Yeah.
And that's probably enough. Although it isn't necessarily enough, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of fights in Ricky Simone's career where he has been able to effectively dictate the openings of the wrestling exchanges, but hasn't been able to control the scrambles. He is not a positionally his wrestling game is mostly rinse and repeat kind of takedowns rather than being a lockdown control fighter. Just for some MMA math, Corey Sandhagen took he didn't take Batista down, but I think he flying kneed him and then jumped on top of him.
Yeah.
But he could not keep he could not keep Batista down. Batista was able to scramble out from underneath him.
Yeah.
But Rob Font was able to scramble fairly consistently with Ricky Simon, and he even ended up beating him simply because he could dictate the fight with his jab once he was on the feet, and Simone could not get any consistent top control going.
Yeah.
So there is certainly.
And of course, there's that fight with Merab Dvalishvili, which was just trading takedowns with zero ground control at all from either man.
Yeah. Although I think actually possibly, because Merab is such a freak that it's one of those guys you just don't like using him as a comparison for anyone else. I think the closest comparison to Batista, I think it's Ray Borg. Even though Borg is, tiny and
he's tiny,
Batista's actually quite tall. It's the ability to give up scrambles but still actually give up takedowns but still be a sensationally good scrambler, and being able to convert those into positions, being able to handle himself on the feet. And this was a close fight.
Very close. I see what you mean. In that particular phase, he's a solid parallel. Yes.
Yeah, because I do think that Batista is one of those guys where he is nominally a striker, but his best weapon is simply that his scrambling ability and his grappling.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Simone is as we've said, he's just a very consistent, dangerous offensive striker. He's got a good jab. He thinks about what he's doing. He does have defense. It's not something that comes to him naturally, I don't think. But he will, as he goes later on into fights, he will slip, he will counter. He is a very well-schooled fighter.
Yeah.
And I do just think, being able to rack up, as in the Ray Borg fight, being able to rack up points on the feet, combined with being able to dictate the opening parts of the wrestling exchanges, i.e. he is still getting positions of control, and he is still holding them for long enough to just be able to, he's clearly winning the fight, is the main thing. He's still, Ray Borg wins some scrambles, Ray Borg lands some body shots. There isn't much of a doubt, I think, who actually wins that fight. Just being able to initiate the scrambles, to be winning the beginning of them, because I'm not sure that. Because for as much as Ricky Simone isn't a guy he's not a guy who controls the top position, right? He's not someone who's able to maintain top control. He's also not someone who ever gives up top control or gets out grappled.
Yeah, that's true.
Easily,
He's every bit as insane a scrambler as Batista.
Yeah. It's not like Batista's going to reverse him and then suddenly, we're talking Ricky Simone is just like Chael Sonnen.
No.
Where he's just toast if the other guy gets dominant control positions on him.
It would have to be like Batista's finishes of Brian Kelleher or Guido Canetti, where the scramble happens and he's just instantly on a body triangle and chokes the guy out while he's still realizing he's in the body triangle. And that does seem...
Yeah.
more unlikely against Ricky Simone. He is a relentless scrambler, will always, and just so dynamic. This is the other thing, is that Batista has, he's had a good run. Has he ever been tested by an athlete of Ricky Simone's caliber? Somebody that fast and that's strong. That was the thing that really came through in Simone's fight with poor Jack Shore. Yep. Jack Shore was doing everything right, as he always does, and even made the calculated risk decision of, okay, this is not going well. I have to put pressure on this guy to stop these takedowns, and then just got clocked. Because, it was a calculated risk after all. And that was the thing, is that Jack Shore is a great defensive wrestler. He's a great grappler and wrestler in general. When Ricky Simone got a hold of him, it is, again, a game-breaking kind of physical ability that he had to just win when Jack Shore should have been at least 50-50 in those positions. He could just put that extra bit of horsepower in there. Now, I will say, Mario Batista had what I thought was a very impressive showing against Damon Blackshear in his last fight. Somebody, by the way, we were reminded in the comments of the Handies, we should have pegged for a Submission of the Year nominee at least, because he hit a twister last year in the Octagon. But hey, we don't know. we don't know. We don't know what happened that year. We just sort of make it up. But Damon Blackshear, while not as sophisticated, not as experienced as Ricky Simone, he is a really, really impressive young fighter. He has shown an uncanny ability to quickly adapt to like this level of competition. And he is also really physically imposing. The only real difference, and this is in Ricky Simone's favor, is that Batista was able to wear Blackshear out by defending his takedowns and winning the scrambles and making him rinse and repeat so often. He was able to tire him out, which allowed him ultimately to overcome the strength advantage. You cannot tire Ricky Simone out. I believe it is impossible.
Yeah, no one has ever done it up to and including. I mean, that is when you can use someone like Merab, because you can use them as a benchmark. You can be like, Merab Dvalishvili couldn't tire this guy out. No one can tire this guy out.
He was tit for tat with Merab Dvalishvili for 15 absolutely insane minutes of like, let me just look at the stats. I'm curious. How many takedowns were attempted in that fight? Merab attempted 22. Ricky Simone attempted 7. Only 6 of Merab's 22 are credited as having been completed, and he only had 2 minutes and 42 seconds of control time. So that just gives you a picture of how much energy-intensive scrambling was going on all throughout that fight. It was literally like they were just swapping takedown attempts and just scrambling out. Like probably a lot of those takedowns were sort of quote-unquote completed and just led to zero control because the scramble immediately ensued.
Yeah, I think with the possible exception of Pantoja Royval 1 and Pantoja Moreno 3.
Yeah.
It is the most exhausting fight to watch I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. You know what though? I'm going to do an anti-New Year's resolution. I ended 2023 having decided to just do gut picks. My gut says Ricky Simone.
Yep.
But I'm going to prove that really no change is possible in human life and overthink myself into picking Mario Batista here. And I'll tell you why. Is Ricky Simone going to just straight up out-wrestle Mario Batista? Because I think that's his most obvious edge, is that he can push him in that phase in such a way that he won't tire himself out. It's not like Damon Blackshear didn't have success, grappling with Batista and making him work. I think Ricky Simone could very likely wear Batista out doing that. If he doesn't, yes, he is a surprisingly principled striker. He is adaptive. He pays attention. He hits the body. He looks for counters. But he's short, and the last taller power striker that he faced was Song Yadong, who just stuck him at range and made him duck into any strike he wanted. And Batista can do this, especially as a fight goes on. But even very quickly into the fight, he can draw his opponent into some savage knees. Guy throws good uppercuts, good hooks, works his way into range intelligently. Ricky Simone is the smart pick, but, I think Batista might be able to hurt him on the feet. And provided Ricky Simone doesn't just immediately start throwing Batista around as best he can, I think Batista has a real shot.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think also it looks pretty much guaranteed to be the best fight on the card in terms of...
Oh, it looks, like a barn burner.
The level, I mean, I think, Benitez Miller might end up being, everyone's favorite because there's a solid chance that like
Somebody
Jim
gets
Miller is going to
deaded.
clock him in the face.
Yeah.
And then Benitez will possibly either be finished by that or will come back and kick his ass.
Yep.
That would be everyone. I think that would be everyone's favorite. But yeah, this in terms of like the level of action, like the scrambling, this is the most exciting fight on the card.
Phil, you've forgotten this card also features Andrei Arlovsky versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. Talk about
I love
arm
Andrei Arlovsky. I'm very glad he's been able to like make such a successful living. Putting on such horrific fights so consistently for so many years. Like, good for him, as long as I don't have to watch it.
That's a skip. That's a skip from Phil. All right. But yeah, you know, it's fun to pick Batista. Like I said, I just want to emphasize, I think this is a real goddamn fight. Very much a double-edged matchup. And I will say, yeah, Ricky Simón makes the most sense. He's just, I think, at a physical sort of barrier that Batista has yet to really surpass. He's just an unusually gifted fighter, and he has proven that in his ability to grow so quickly, relatively late in his career. But Batista also on the come up, also dangerous, and certainly seems to have some hard counters to Ricky Simón's like A game, an A game which he doesn't really lean on as much as he used to.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not like anyone. It's not like Ricky Simón hasn't lost fights to people who have just scrambled out from his takedowns.
Yeah,
being an ironclad takedown defender is not a necessity in order to beat Ricky Simón.
No, yeah. Being a great scrambler helps. He's not going to hold you down. He's very much like an alpha male fighter who just happens to not be at the gym. Yeah, and he can be hurt. So, sure. And even was submitted once long ago, though. If Ray Borg couldn't teleport to his back and convert that into a rear naked choke, then Batista has pretty long odds.
Yep.
All right. Well, pretty banger matchup to close out the first real breakdown episode of 2023. Of course, the fun doesn't stop here because next week we have a pay-per-view. We have Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis.
It's the most actual middleweight title fight since Rich Franklin versus Nate Quarry.
And that sound, I believe, that was you making the sound that Dricus du Plessis assumes black people make. Sorry,
I knew you were going to make that joke.
We were accused in the handies of implying that Dricus du Plessis is probably racist. And I'd be like, I don't know what gave you the impression that we were trying to imply anything. The not a real African comments were enough for me. That being said, it's a fantastically stupid matchup for a title fight. I am absolutely here for it. No denying Dricus du Plessis, despite all appearances, is a very, very good and very dangerous fighter. And we will definitely have fun talking to you about that one next week. Until then, make sure that you find us on the social medias. I'm on Twitter, basically just on fight nights, but if that's what you care about, likely you do because you're listening to this right now. You can find me over there at Boxing Bush. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. You can find me on Blue Sky as well. I hardly post anything, but it's mostly not fight related, and it's pretty quiet over there, which I kind of like. I just don't do much posting anymore, Phil. I'm weary.
It's graceful.
I'm tired, you know? It's just, I just can't have an opinion on everything that happens on the internet.
Get back in the content mines, Connor. The world needs more takes.
All right. We'll talk to you next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of Face Punch and you came to the right place, this has been Heavy Hands.